Now we're unmuted. And we have returned from sauntering, and our YouTube link is up. And so, welcome everyone who's online, and thank you for being there. And we will let Tim continue with his presentation, beginning with 41 school districts in Utah and a Utah map.
Okay, well now I know what icing the pitcher looks like, so hopefully I can get my game back on here. So anyway, what I was mentioning just before we went to the break is, in addition to the building task force that has been meeting and helping the board develop a recommendation for how to handle some of the challenges the district is facing with growth, there's been a second committee that started meeting a couple of months ago called the Bond Committee. And the purpose of that committee is to start to put the pieces in place that if the board goes ahead with a bond resolution, that we have all the pieces in place to make sure that we're informing the public and that we have all our I's dotted and our T's crossed when it comes to communicating with the Lieutenant Governor's office and the local election officials, and make sure that's all in place. So just wanted to assure you that that is happening. So with that, I'm just going to go into our presentation this evening. And again, this is a presentation that we are willing as a bond committee to give any place, anytime in the Valley to any group who is interested in having us to explain to them what the genesis of this bond project is and what we're proposing as a district to do. I will tell you that we've already scheduled probably 40 meetings. We're all the way from school community councils to our school staff. We're working with city councils. The superintendent's actually started his meetings with mayors to make sure all of the mayors in our community are up to date. And again, we'll have some public meetings that the board will be part of as well that we'll do. But if there is an occasion, if we go forward with the bond resolution, that you have a group that you think it's important that we present to, we're willing to do that at any time. So just know you have that ability. Once the bond resolution passes, if that is the case, the district can't promote actively the bond, but we can do a lot in the name of information and asking people to vote. So that will shift gears with us just a little bit. But I think the information does a good job explaining what the issues are. And so I'll just go right into that now. So 41 school districts in the state of Utah. Cache County is the 11th largest school district in the state, with nearly 20,000 students in 25 schools. And that's a lot different than when I moved into the Valley 26 years ago. I think we were sitting right around 12,000 students. So that's almost doubling in size in that time period. Our current configuration is 17 elementary schools, grade K through 6, 3 middle schools, 7, 8, feeding 4 high schools, 9, 12, and 1 alternative high school, which is a 9, 12, although they don't take ninth grade students all that often. We serve 27 communities in the Cache County School District. Some of them incorporated, some of them not incorporated, but these are the 27 communities that are represented inside our 25 schools. Just historically, the district has looked at bond initiatives with the amount of growth that we've experienced about every 10 years. The 2003 bond was for a $60 million bond. And I think Chris and I were part of that bond. I was a parent at the time, not an employee of the school district, and Chris was a brand new professor at USU, if I remember. So that was a little while ago. But that bond did several things for the school district, some structural and efficiency upgrades to several of our schools that you can see up top, including one of our oldest high schools, which was Skyview High School. We built new elementary schools in Mendon, Nibley, and Smithfield. We did some strategic purchases of lands, which is really, I think, paying off for the school district right now. and we built a new technology, this building, transportation and maintenance facility at that time. Were part of the projects that we undertook on that bond. All of them completed on budget, on time. In 2013, we passed a $129 million bond. That bond had two main goals, although we did a lot of other projects as well, but the two main goals was to handle some of the size issues we had in the secondary schools. We ended up building two high schools, one in Millville and one in North Logan, Green Canyon and Ridgeline. And the other priority in that bond was seismic upgrades to several of our schools, Providence, Millville, Summit, and Sunrise Elementaries being some of the main ones that we did, taking down two-story structures and replacing them with one-story structures. We built a new elementary school in Lewiston that replaced an entire building that was taken down. And then we converted three of our schools from middle schools to elementary schools, Cedar Ridge, Willow Valley, and White Pine. And in the case of Willow Valley, that replaced Wellsville Elementary, which was also taken down because of seismic concerns, and White Pine replaced Park Elementary, which was deeded over to the city of Richmond, which has made good use of that building, but it still had some seismic concerns that we were worried about. And then New Cache High Alternative High School, which has served the district well since then. And again, all of those projects were completed on time and on budget. And very proud of those. We've really utilized those buildings, and they've been great assets for the school district. Since that bond, in the 10 years since that bond, the school district has grown by over 4,000 students in that time period. You can see that mostly we've fluctuated between 300 and 500 students each year, with a couple of anomalies on that chart. One at the very beginning where we grew one year by 818 students. Then you see the anomaly during COVID when there wasn't much movement in the population during that COVID year. So we only grew 31 students that year, but the very next year we grew 721 students. That's about a 2% per year growth that we've experienced as a district. What's that growth done to the school district? Well, in the secondary setting, we have been able to absorb a great deal of that growth because of the decision of the board to build those two new high schools. In fact, we've actually added the 10 classroom additions to both of those high schools earlier than we anticipated to help accommodate some of that growth as well. Those were planned. We got a very good price on those and completed those projects as well, not out of a bond, but out of district capital funds. We haven't been so fortunate in our elementary schools. When people move into the school district, they don't come in neat packages, but we basically have 11 of our elementary schools that are operating above capacity currently, and one school, Spring Creek Middle School, which is operating above capacity. Spring Creek is unique because it's our smaller middle school. It holds just under 800 students. And this year we'll be operating at about 850 students. And it sits on a very small footprint. In fact, part of the soccer field that sits just south of that school isn't even owned by the school district that we utilize. But the core of that school doesn't lend itself to adding on to that school to make it compatible with the other middle schools that we have. To help accommodate the growth that we have in the school district, we have 38 portable classrooms. You can see that on the chart there on the right, that we're operating across those 12 schools to accommodate the growth that we've experienced. So this is at the heart of some of the challenges the school district is facing when it comes to accommodating the growth that we've already experienced. Something else that's developed is last year the state of Utah funded all-day kindergarten for the state, and we offer that as an option to our parents statewide. About 94 to 96% of parents choose all-day kindergarten when given the option, and I think that would be the case in our school district. In 6 of our schools, we have offered all-day kindergarten because we had room. And that number is held true. We have filled those classes. So we fully offer all-day kindergarten in 6 of our elementary schools. The other 6 at the top of this slide, we only partially can offer all-day kindergarten, and we offer a lottery to those parents. So not all parents can take advantage of that. You get in with a lottery, and then the bottom 5 on that slide can't accommodate all-day kindergarten. So the parents represented in those communities don't have that option because of the overcapacity that we're facing in the school district. We're also concerned, as much of the country is making sure our schools are safe. And as this quote indicates, we believe that every child is entitled to feel safe in the classroom, in the hallways and on the playgrounds. And we have actually initiated a lot of projects over the last couple of years to help improve our safety and security at our schools. The last bond, in 2013, we put internal door locks on all of our doors so teachers can lock down their classrooms. That happened last bond. Since that bond, we've put quite a bit of money into video surveillance in our schools. Last year, we improved all of the entryways to our elementary schools, putting a doorbell system on all of our elementary schools so that we could secure the front. We just finished a project to do what's called access control on all of our schools. So all of our schools now have some form of access control where the principal can lock down the school with one key fob, all the doors that have that ability in the school to lock down. And so that's a great benefit to our schools. So we just redid our 2 older high schools, our 3 older middle schools, and then all of our elementary schools have received that improvement. One of the issues that we haven't been able to address is secure vestibules, so we can control someone's path when they come to the school, so they have to go through the front office to get there. So some of our schools, when they do ring the doorbell and let them in, they can get right to a classroom before they have to pass through an office. And so as part of this future bond that we're proposing to the board, we'd like to correct that in those schools and do controlled path vestibules in those schools, as well as shore up some of the other pieces of security that we feel are important. Some of it is some bulletproof glass additions to some of the front of our buildings so they can't break the glass and reach in and grab the, open the door handle. Another one's just finishing out some surveillance and some of the access control and finishing off some of those projects as well.
Tim, how many of our buildings still need vestibules?
I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but it's well over half of the schools. Yeah, I have a list on another slide in another presentation, and it's a lengthy list. So.
Thank you.
All right, so when we formed the building task force last spring, their purpose was to review the district's building needs after the unprecedented growth. They were to look at school configurations and scheduling options, what and how, the need for new buildings, when and where, the need for property purchases, where, the school safety needs, what and where, and bonding recommendations, how much and when. And so that's some of the issues that the bond committee or building task force looked at. Here are some of the challenges that the committee looked at. One of them is the main one, is how to resolve the 11 elementary schools operating above capacity. You either have to build new elementary schools or you have to figure out a way to increase the capacity at the ones you're at. So that was one of the issues they looked at. How to provide access to all-day kindergarten for all 27 communities. How to resolve 3 middle schools feeding 4 high schools and the inability to expand our smallest middle school, which is operating above capacity. I just want to remind the board on that one that when the last board or bond passed, it was understood by constituents that they would be busing their kids through Logan City to get to Spring Creek in Providence. That was a verbal commitment we made to our constituents to address that in the next bond. And so I think and we've made that clear to the building task force. So I think they felt some need to address that as well as one of the challenges was we don't really have 4 true feeder middle schools for our 4 high schools. How to meet the needs of the community without raising tax rates. That has been clear in the Y2K analysis, Y2 and analytics analysis that we did, that taxpayers are concerned about raising taxes, and they want to know or be assured that we're going to take a hard look at that. So this morning, the superintendent and Jared and I met with the Taxpayers Association, and we ran through our whole bond process, and that was one of the things on their mind, of course, is are we being responsible, and are we raising taxes? So. And then how best to position the district for future growth, especially in our fastest growing communities. And many of you are aware that some of our communities are continuing to grow with housing developments planned in those communities.
Tim, do we know, we do know, but can you remind me which are our top 3 fastest growing communities? Smithfield is number 1.
Yeah, that would still be, Smithfield would be, is that what you said? Mm-hmm. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Yeah, Smithfield is going to be one of those communities. Nibley continues. Nibley was for many years our fastest growing community. I can't remember the number of doors they just proposed to add to Nibley, but I want to say it almost doubles the number of doors in Nibley. The Providence, Millville area continues to be a fast growing, as does Hiram, as does Hyde Park, North Logan. Some of them are getting a little bit landlocked, but I think there's housing developments in all those. But I'd say the top 3 continue to be Smithfield, Nibley, and kind of that inner Providence area there. So.
Thank you.
All right, so what are the options? What do we do? Well, we could build more portable classrooms. Certainly do that, but there's 38 portable classrooms in operation already, and those, from a safety and security standpoint, that's not a nice permanent solution in which to house students. It also is a solution that's pretty limited by the footprint of the school. I'll give you an example. Providence Elementary is operating, I believe, at 107% right now without all-day kindergarten. There is no room on their footprint if we wanted to add portables. So they're operating above capacity with the inability for us to put any portable classrooms on that site. And some of the other facilities that have portable classrooms, we can't add anymore because we've added probably the maximum amount to fit on that footprint. So I don't think the committee thought that was a very viable solution moving forward. They're expensive. I think the last double portables that we built were $450,000 each. And when you start realizing that cost, it becomes pretty clear you want to do something a little more permanent than incur that cost for a portable unit.
I was just doing doing the calculations, surprise, and if we have 38 portables, if they were like an average of 500, if they were valued at 500,000 a piece, that's over 15,000 or $15 million. It's almost the cost of a new elementary.
Yeah.
Just to, so why would we want to put more money into
right.
Temporary shelter for our kids rather than something brick and mortar?
Exactly. And they are a nice solution because you can't always predict where the growth is going to come. We've had communities build 100, 200, 300 doors, and we haven't got kids out of those communities. We've had others that have built 50 doors, and we get 100 kids out of those doors. So portable classrooms allow us to be real agile in meeting the growth needs of our communities. And we've only built probably 6 or so new portables. A lot of the portables that we've had have been left over from past growth, and we just move them around. We've had to remodel a few. We actually have 45 portables total in the school district, so there's 7 out there that we could move and utilize if needed. So,
thank you.
Another option is we just tell the state, thanks for funding all-day kindergarten, but we're going to limit that or eliminate it completely. And I don't think you'd get a very warm reception for that idea among our constituents that are demanding that option for kindergartners.
Actually, when I was leaving work tonight, one of my colleagues, when I told her where I was going, I said, anything you need, kind of on my way on, she said, just make sure they have all-day kindergarten.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's a very popular
that's
thing.
an anecdote, but still.
Yeah, and it's not something that other school districts aren't facing right now with the funding of that all-day kindergarten. But I would say that you're going to start to feel a lot more community members this year who know that other communities are getting that benefit and they can't because their schools are too crowded. We could explore year-round schedules. We've done that before in the district. It was not a popular solution. I think, Kathy, you worked in a year-round school. I think there was a lot of cheering that went on when the district was able to move away from all-day or year-round schedules. We don't have air conditioning in all of our older buildings, so that also presents a challenge with offering year-round schedules. But if you went that way, that'd be definitely something we'd probably have to explore, and it would probably have to be a bond issue as well. One option the committee looked at is just let's build more elementary schools, and we look strongly at that. If we have a problem in our elementaries and we can't house all the elementary kids, let's just build more elementary schools. There's a big challenge to that, and one of those is you have to strategically locate those where they're going to do the most good. Sometimes you're building elementary schools next to each other, and you're not guaranteed that the population will hold in those areas. And so it's a little more risky and pretty cost expensive. New elementary schools coming in about $22 to $25 million right now, $22 million hard costs and probably another 3 or 4 million soft costs to put up. And so if we forecast out and tried to build 4 to 6 elementary schools, we'd be at the level that we're going to talk about in a minute to try to strategically solve the problem, and we really don't solve it for many of our schools. The committee looked at changing grade configurations. I mentioned last time I was here, we've been very successful as a school district in changing grade configurations. We've had K2 schools, we've had 3-5 schools, we've had 6-7 schools, 7-8s, ninth grade centers, 9-12 high schools. And we've done most of that work, not out of we think there's some magic grade configuration where kids learn better, but we did that to maximize the efficiency of our buildings. And we've been very successful with that. Moving the ninth grade into the high schools, one of our most recent grade configuration changes, and freeing up our 6-7 centers to be converted back to elementary schools was a very wise move by the district because it allowed us to maximize the buildings that we had. So that was definitely something that the committee wanted to look at. We moved last time the 6th grade back to the elementary school setting. That's actually typically a middle school curriculum in the 6th grade. So that's been a little bit challenging. I will tell you, most 6th graders I talk to can't wait to get out of elementary school and move on. But that's something that caught the attention of the committee right away as a possible looking at that, because the advantage of it is if we move 6th grade out of elementary schools, and we do that across all 17 elementary schools, we almost immediately resolve all the capacity issues that we have in our elementary school in one stroke, bringing relief to those elementary schools, creating room for all-day kindergarten, and also creating room for some growth in some of those schools.
Tim, I have had communication from a few parents about concerns about moving kids to middle school, 6th graders to middle school again. Is there any data that shows that one configuration is so much better than another configuration for 6th graders?
I don't think you're going to find conclusive evidence. I think you're going to find solutions with pros and cons to both things. Every time the district has changed grade configurations as part of a bond process, it has, people like what they're used to, and there are concerns. Those concerns kind of fade away once you go a certain direction, and then they don't want to move back from the solution you put into place the next time. So I think there's some of that bias of liking what you already know and are familiar with. I will tell you that the middle school principals think the best place for the middle schools, those sixth grade students, is in a middle school setting, just from the fact of keeping them together and having the curriculum shared between those three grades. But I wouldn't say there's conclusive evidence that one is better than another. Okay. The Y2 analytics survey that we looked at last week, if you remember Kyrene presenting one piece of data on there, which was when asked the question of would you be in favor of moving sixth grade back to the middle school environment, 70% of the respondents said yes, that would not cause them any concern. So you're going to have concerns, but I think that piece of data should give us a little bit of solace in knowing that most of our constituents wouldn't be opposed to that. So
Could I come? Oh, I'm sorry. Go
From
ahead.
a personal perspective, I had children in both, and I found no difference whatsoever, and actually taught the sixth grade in middle school as a secondary trained teacher, and loved doing that, and saw a lot of growth in the kids socially from being in that type of a setting. And there are quite a few students who are really ready for a change. They are just ready mentally. And so I liked it a lot, but both ways worked.
right.
I was just going to say, for the record, I was on that building task force in 2013 as well. And somehow that's what that was kind of part of my focus and my role on that building task force, is looking at published research about grade configurations. And what they were finding back then, and I think, like Tim said, it's fair to say that, it's hard to argue that this is totally conclusive, because all of these studies are observational. None of them are randomized. However, what they seem to find, in study after study, was that, slicing and dicing configurations in the way that Cash did at the time was actually not beneficial to students. I mean, I'm talking generally, not specifically in Cash, because the more transitions, actually, the more, I guess trauma is too strong a word, but disruptions actually negatively affected students over time. And in fact, at the time, I think some school districts across the country that felt like they were being very progressive were moving to a K-8 model, because there was a lot of belief that, or a lot of, I guess, data to suggest that if you kept kids with, I mean, it sounds a little bit counterintuitive sometimes, because everybody likes to think their kids are really precocious and, they're socially evolving, quickly. But there was a lot of data to indicate that keeping those students back with younger kids actually was better, in terms of their behavioral outcomes, academic outcomes, and so on. Like I said, speaking as kind of a data guy, when all of that is observational, there are always caveats there. But I remember at the time thinking that this reconfiguration, putting sixth graders back with, having a K-6 is actually very, very positive. It's, there's so much for the district to keep track of. It would be interesting, in retrospect, maybe to go back and do an analysis of outcomes, since 2013, to see if that's had any impact. If we're interested in that, it might be a good idea, just as kind of an internal check to see what did happen, comparatively comparing those students following that reconfiguration to before. that would be an interesting project, and one that I think we could probably tackle if we used, like, say, the Analytics Center up at the university. But that's all I wanted to add is, for the record, even though parents might be comfortable with it, and even though the differences might actually end up being kind of marginal, that was what we found at the time, that it was better to leave sixth graders in that K to 6 environment than moving them on. But, if parents are comfortable with it, then I guess, like Tim says, an enormous pro is solving overcapacity problems in elementary schools, which could very much positively impact the K through 5, levels if they're not crammed in to those spaces. But that's what we found at the time.
Thank you. That's interesting because as I have visited with middle school principals, under our current configuration with only 7th grade and 8th grade in middle school, they feel that the kids don't have as much buy-in to the school because they're only there 2 years. So if 6th grade was added back into middle school, so they were there for 3 years, that there would be more student and family buy-in to the middle school itself setting, and thereby, enhancing student performance.
Yeah,
But that's all anecdotal.
Yeah, but it's interesting you say that, because I think that some of that's supported by research as well, that the longer students stay in a particular configuration, the better off they are, because you're lowering the number of transitions. But in addition to that, the research indicated at the time that whatever the oldest grade was, that was the grade that had the most kind of antisocial behavioral problems. That once you put those students, 9th graders, and I think we've all heard stories about, from our own kids at North Cache. It can turn into kind of like Lord of the Flies, when 9th graders are running the school. But when you put them in with older kids, 10th, 11th, 12th graders, well, suddenly their behavior is normalized very quickly, because they can't get away with, well, I can use this word now because we introduced it earlier, but the shenanigans that they got away with, when they were running the school, basically. But now they have to, the older kids find that unacceptable, and they get them to shape up. And so there are advantages also to having 6th graders move in, so that their behavior can be normalized by older kids. But which kind of, I think, connects to what you're saying a little bit. A longer experience in the school, combined with, getting your behavior normalized before you move to the next step, is a positive.
Thank you. That's great discussion.
Let me just anecdotally add to that discussion. I raised my kids back when there were 5 configurations and the possibility of 5 transitions if you count from home to kindergarten, all the way through. And I would rather be in a situation where we have 3, I guess, total transitions, and we're not increasing that number at all by making this change, because we would keep 3 levels in which students move between. And by the way, it makes going to parent-teacher conferences across 5 schools very difficult as well.
Agreed.
Yeah,
That's how my
so-
kids went to school also.
Yeah. All right, so this is the proposal that the board received from the Building Task Force last year. One of the caveats is the Building Task Force wanted to keep the tax rate with no increase to the tax rate. And so they were operating on a budget that this is the configuration that made the most sense. And at the heart of this configuration is a new North Middle School, a new South Middle School, both with a 1,200 student capacity. That would bring all 4 of our middle schools up to nearly a 1,200 student capacity. Convert Spring Creek back to an elementary school, so we go from 17 to 18 elementary schools. And if you look at the chart on the left on elementary schools, you can see that in all but 3 cases, we immediately resolve the capacity issue at the majority of our elementary schools. and leave some headroom in all of our secondary settings as well. As you can see the percentages on those. So that was the recommendation that came to the board last year. We did discuss at length if all things being equal and we had the money to pursue what we thought was the best option, it was this option, which is the addition of the 2 middle schools like the previous option. The addition of another new elementary school in addition to Spring Creek, so bringing our total elementary schools to 19. And if you look up on the chart now, in all but one case, we've resolved all of the capacity issues. And if you look at some of the percentages on some of those elementary schools, we've left quite a bit of headroom in the elementary environment too in some of our largest or fastest growing communities. Canyon is the only exception, but that school district shares boundaries with a couple of other schools. It'll be below capacity, and it would be fairly easy to make some boundary adjustments if we thought that was needed to take care of that issue as well. Any questions about this option? The reason this one's coming back around is 1 year later after the board considered the last year's recommendation is we're in a much better financial situation than we were last year, and we're able to create the headroom in our bonding capacity to request enough money to tackle this proposal and still keep the tax rate from increasing at all. So this would be the recommendation that we propose to the building task force that we would like to move forward with as a school district, and what we're recommending to the board tonight in the resolution that you'll see later from Jared is that we take this recommendation, basically build a middle school in Hyde Park, a middle school in Nibley, convert Spring Creek to an elementary school, convert or build a new elementary school. That new elementary school, by the way, would be located in Hyde Park, most likely. We have land property there, that's where it's needed, and it would allow us, so we spoke a little bit about the DLI potential magnets that we are going to explore as a district to see if that's another feasible solution. The advantage of that is that one allows us to free up capacity space in Smithfield, in Providence, and in Nibley all at the same time as well, and basically remove half of the students from each of those schools, and really gives us some headroom in our fastest growing communities.
I have a question. After your presentation on this last week, there were some community members listening to that who emailed the board recently still and have concerns about Canyon still being over capacity. Can you explain that a little better?
Yeah, so it's just in the reason that school is still above capacity is it just doesn't, we don't have schools close enough in proximity to eliminate that 8% overage in Canyon without making some boundary changes to make that happen.
But it's possible to lower.
To resolve that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we just didn't want to reflect it here if it wasn't, without getting into the boundary change discussion.
So,
But that's
Tim,
definitely.
for clarification, which are the other elementary schools that border up to Canyon?
Millville and Lincoln.
Millville, Lincoln?
Yeah, and you can see Lincoln is not a great solution.
Right.
Neither is necessarily Millville. It's got a little bit of headroom. You also have to, I think Gary would concur with this if he's here. Elementary shifts a lot as your demographic changes within, and Logan's going through this, a little bit of this with being landlocked, is as your community ages and kids move through the elementary setting, as long as there's not more development coming into that area, you can ride through some of that growth and come out on the other end as they move into the secondary setting. So there's a lot to look at and examine when you're doing that. But we also wanted to be transparent and show you that we still got a little bit of an issue there.
am I remembering correctly that you said that these school capacities reflect not utilizing portables? That's a
Yes.
reflection of
Yes.
just, so that would,
Yeah.
so this number, 108% for Canyon would be
Would
not
resolve itself
utilizing-
if we left some kids in portables there.
So using portables would bring that down substantially.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep. Good observation.
thank you.
Okay, so this is the proposed configuration, 19 K-5 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, 4 high schools, and 1 alternative high school. We think this is the best solution to resolving all of the issues I showed you earlier on some of the challenges we're facing. It resolves nearly all of the capacity problems we have in the elementary schools. It creates 4 true feeders that match the boundaries of our 4 high schools. It resolves a lot of those issues. It allows us to stay within the tax rate. Did you have a question, Chris?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to make a comment. On the previous slide, is it, because this is going to be a public presentation, right?
Correct.
Is it worth, I mean, it's just a small thing, but worth putting Cache High on the previous slide, at least, at least listing that among the high schools?
Yeah, we could do that. That's easy.
Just for the sake of completeness.
I'd appreciate it if you would.
It's Cache High is an interesting, when we talk about capacity, because we keep that capacity set.
Right.
And it shifts a lot, so we don't typically discuss it, but yeah.
But it still represents
Yep.
capacity.
Yep,
So it might be good to
absolutely.
look at.
Be easy to add, so we'd be
Yeah,
happy.
thanks, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no problem. So what exactly are the building projects proposed by this bond? It's these items here, a new 6th to 8th grade middle school in Hyde Park with an estimated cost at $55 million. A new 6th middle school in Nibley at estimated cost at $55 million. Conversion of Spring Creek Middle School to an elementary school, $1.5 million. We've done that before. We've made improvements to that school since that have taken care of some of the items that we did at Cedar Ridge, which is its sister school. A new elementary school in Hyde Park, $25 million. Safety improvements that I spoke about with the vestibules, $1 million. And then we actually built a little bit of an inflationary contingency into that, given that we're in a period of time that we're facing some inflation and we want to be able to continue to complete our projects on time and complete them on budget. And where the fact that we don't have the same premium rates available to us as we went into the last bond project, that gives us a little bit of insurance that we can finish those projects.
And just because we have approval for a certain number of millions of dollars of bond, we don't have to sell them
Yeah.
all, right?
Yes. And I was pointing out to the Taxpayers Association this morning that we're pretty conservative in the type of building that we put up in the Cache District. And I believe there was a high school, 2 high schools that I know of that were completed in the state when we were building our 2 high schools that each came in at twice the amount that we were building, a high school for. So we built 2 high schools at the same price. 2 other districts in the state were building 1 high school. Part of that was the timing. It was just after the recession, and people were hungry for work, and the interest rates were low. If we hit any of those conditions again, it definitely doesn't mean we have to sell the bonds. It just means we're authorized for the bonds. So if we don't need that inflationary contingency, there's no reason we have to sell those bonds to represent that amount. So. All right, so the new Hyde Park Middle School sits just north of Green Canyon High School. That's the lot that the district purchased for that. You can see the site plan of how it would sit on that lot. If you drive out to the roundabout just north of Green Canyon, you can see they're punching the road through there. And they have another roundabout just beyond that, and that's where this school sits, is at the end of that roundabout. Although it doesn't connect directly to it, it's back about a half a block, so. And then the road, as you can see there, wraps around that school for access to the back.
So that roundabout's not on this map?
No, it sits, if you were to continue that line that curves down out here a little bit, it sits down there, so it doesn't sit right around the school, which I actually prefer in the middle school. They were going to put a roundabout on 10th North right next to Mount Logan Middle School at one time, but the danger in crossing for middle school students at roundabouts, they decided to keep a traffic signal there. We don't have to deal with a roundabout near a middle school here, so I think that's a good thing.
Okay, thank you.
This is just an elevation rendering, thanks to Stephen's group that's here tonight for giving us rendering of what the middle school would look like. I mentioned last time that this school has actually been built twice south of us down in Weber School District. It is a footprint that looks very much like Green Canyon and Ridgeline High School. In fact, that's the model that they used to design that. The only difference is they made some pretty significant structural changes in that the common areas for the middle school students are close to the offices of counselors and administrators. And that was one thing that our high schools wish were different if they could redesign those. But for a middle school setting, that's even more critical for supervision. So I think that's a good design there. This is the new Nibley Middle School. So this sits right next to Heritage Elementary. You can see the lot, the aerial there of the lot. You can see how the school would be situated on the lot there in the site plan. Just as we did with Green Canyon and Ridgeline, we also realized great cost savings by repeating the same building twice. We also learned a lot as building those buildings, so we were able to take advantage of that learning. And as I said, these two buildings in large part have been already erected south of us, so we'll have some learning from that as well. And were designed by Design West, who we hired as an architect on this project as well. And then this is just a rendition of the proposed elementary school. And if you know Birch Creek, Heritage, Lewiston, and Mountainside, this is the same model. Again, the district realizes a lot of cost savings by building using the same plan. This has been a plan we've been very pleased with how it's turned out for those schools, and one that we don't feel at all uncomfortable of replicating. And then this is just Spring Creek Middle School, which we'll renovate into an elementary school, and we do a vestibule there on the front of that school as well. And then this slide just speaks of some of the safety enhancements. Again, many of these we've spent capital funds. The state of Utah actually funded some safety or provided some safety funds this year. So we're not asking that the bond take care of all these issues. We're moving forward with many of those and are quite aggressive in what we're doing to try to improve safety at our schools. But we want to make sure all 25 of our schools are brought up to the same standard, and that controlled path piece up on the right there is just an example of that's Wellsville Elementary, actually, of how we would do a safety vestibule in that school. And we've got maps for all of the schools and how we would do the vestibules in those schools to control that path into the school. All right, this is more for public consumption. Just the fact that the state of Utah does not provide school districts with enough capital funds to upgrade or build schools. That process is done in partnership with taxpayers, property taxpayers in a school district. It's where the property owners work together with the district to construct and update schools. Just in a simple vernacular, that's very much like a home mortgage. So the district proposes projects, comes up with a cost proposal for those projects, sells bonds, much like a mortgage, to fund those projects. And then the voters must approve that general obligation bond for the district to sell those bonds. And the district agrees in that to repay those bonds over a period of time. So the bond resolution that you'll see tonight is requesting $139 million to complete those projects. Again, that's without a tax increase. And if approved by voters, this bond would be layered to be paid off over a 20-year period.
You know, it's interesting that with your history of bonding in this district being every 10 years for the last 3 bonds, that the first bond was 60 million, is that right? And the second one was 129, which was more than double what the first one was. And this one, 10 years later, is only 10 million more than the last one. That's really interesting to me.
Right. Yeah, and I think we've worked hard as a school district. Again, we build a very functional but conservative school building to meet our needs to educate kids. And I think we've also been very responsible. Jared may share some numbers with you at some point or even tonight about the good position the school district is in with how aggressive it's been at refunding bonds, restructuring bonds, and taking advantage of aggressive early payoffs to help put us in a position where we're in a good position to be able to do this without raising the tax rate. This slide is really important for us to talk in length with the voters so that they understand what not increasing the tax rate really means. So based on conservative estimates and assuming our taxable value remains steady, the payment of the 2023 bond sales would fit within our existing rate. And basically, essentially what that means is whether we do the bond or not, and our financial presenters tonight will maybe correct me in this, but whether we fund the bond or not, most people are realizing a tax increase because the fact that their property values have increased. And whether or not we do the bond, those tax increases have happened. 2 years ago when I got my tax notice, my taxes went up considerably because of the value of property in the county increased significantly. This last year, my property taxes decreased a little bit as some adjustments were made in that. So the taxpayers won't receive a tax increase because of this bond. Because we passed the bond, they would receive a tax rate increase because of the property value of their home went up. What they are committing to, though, and I think it's important we're transparent with the voters, is that we are committing ourselves to more debt, which will need to be paid off over a longer period of time. But we don't have to increase their tax rate to accomplish that, if that makes sense. And these gentlemen here will explain that much better than me. So this slide speaks to that. My taxes will only increase if the taxable value of your property increases. Otherwise, the amount of the property owner currently pays would not increase. The number of years property owners pay a tax for the bonds would be extended. And then this is the language that is important for you to pay attention to when Jared goes over the resolution in a minute, is the maximum annual tax for an average home, which we have to include on the ballot language. And I think I mentioned the last time we bonded, the average price of a home in Cache Valley was down in the 300,000s. And the average price of a home in Cache Valley is now at 524,000. So the amount of tax increase on that value increase is $234 per year. And the maximum amount for a business of similar value would be $426. But many people have already realized or seen that number in their tax notices, irregardless of what we do with the bond. Questions?
I think we asked them as we went, so.
Okay. Wonderful.
Anybody have any that we didn't ask yet? Okay. Thank you so much, Tim.
You're welcome. Staying here because I'm next on the agenda again, so.
So, after that bond committee report, next up on our reports agenda is the election campaign ethics for district ballot measures.
So just to speak to this for just a moment, this is one of the things that Superintendent McKee brought to our attention, which I think is excellent. And the idea with that is that with a possible bond election coming up, is that the district pass a campaign ethics and district ballot measure policy. And this is, you can see the wording in there, with the intent that we're perfectly transparent with our voters, that as a district, we will, there's a commitment by the board to make sure that we follow election laws when it comes to a ballot measure. So we're committed to inform the public, which I indicated we will be doing in mass in presentations, but the district during its activities will not actively promote the bond and whether people vote yes or no on the bond. We will encourage people to vote, but how they vote will depend on how they feel about the information that we provide to them and what we're proposing.
And that applies to us as well.
Yes. Yep. As far as promotion goes, down there under the heading of that, there is a group meeting this evening just to talk about that are very excited about the board potentially passing a bond resolution next week. So there may be citizen committees like that form and take on the job of promoting the bonds in their neighborhoods and in their communities, because they are interested in all-day kindergarten, or they are interested in relieving the capacity problems in their local elementary. So there's already some things underway, but the district resources won't be used to help those groups. Also, the district just commits to being neutral and being transparent in that policy. So that policy is just over a page long. You can read through there. The next pages that are part of that policy are actually not part of the policy. They're just some training that we'll be providing to members of our staff, board members, bond committee members, district staff, school staff, on what's permitted and what's not permitted when it comes to bond activities. And that employees acting or board members in the capacity of their official capacity need to keep their work informational and not promotional. Any questions about that policy?
Nope.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions? Seeing none, we will thank you, Tim, and move on to review of the bond resolution presented by Ryan Bjarke.
Thanks, Tim, for all that work.
Or is Jared presenting this?
Ryan will present. He's the professional, but I'll give just a little bit of an introduction. In your board packet, there's a copy of the current version of a proposed bond resolution. Ryan, who is our bond counsel, has worked with me through a few versions of that to where we're at today. I thought, Ryan, it would be helpful if you could just review with board members the components of the resolution and what the resolution accomplishes, if you take a couple minutes to do that.
Thanks, Ryan. You looked sort of shocked when I said you were going to present.
I thought I saw Jared's name on the agenda, but I'm happy to do so. It's always great to be up here, and thanks for having me. This is actually going to be, if you adopt the resolution, the start of the process. The first thing that we have to do, basically for the election, is you have to notify the Lieutenant Governor's office and your election officer that you plan to hold an election, and that's the purpose of this resolution. We have to lay out the ballot proposition language and provide that to the Lieutenant Governor and the election officer. So that's basically what this does. You also have a requirement to provide pro and con arguments. Okay? And so this resolution also lays out some of the timing to get those arguments submitted and taken care of. And then it provides for holding of public hearings and public meetings. You're required to have a public hearing and a public meeting. Basically, those will be similar in nature, but with different purposes. The public hearing is to receive input on the bonds and the economic input that it might have. And the public meeting is to allow for presentation of the pro and con arguments and discussion of those arguments. So all of that is what happens in this resolution. We'll have another resolution a little later that will go through kind of the procedures of the election. But this is what this does, is it says, this is going to be our ballot language. This is what we're going forward with. And then sets some key dates in there for you. So a lot of this has already been discussed, but if you go down to section 4, if you look at section 2, one of the things that you'll notice first off is election day is different this year. So normally you're used to an election day early in November, and now we're late in November. The state moved that for the retirement or Congressman Stewart, so that they can have the election at the same time. It also will change some of the mechanics of your election this year, which was normally supposed to be a municipal general election held within the municipalities, and now this is actually going to be a county-run election. So there are just some nuances there. But you can see election day will actually be November 21st this year in section 2. In section 4 is where we present the official ballot, where we have the $139 million that was just discussed. We give some broad language. We don't mention the actual specific projects in the ballot proposition language. And that's to give you a little bit of flexibility. Where you're contemplating multiple projects, it could be that something happens and you have to adjust. In your voter information pamphlet that you do have to include the specific projects that you intend to finance. And then there's a methodology that you can go through if you need to change those. But for the ballot proposition language, because you are bound by what it says, we use more general language there. And we've tried to cover everything that was discussed today. You can also see that we're required to include in there the property tax impact that was discussed. And you see those numbers again with the 234 and the 426 in your average resident and a business. Again, for a resident, you get a 45% decrease in your property value. And so that's why you show the business as well, where that decrease is not in place. We then get into a little bit of language that explains what you think will actually happen. So what we're saying is, if you ignored everything else and you issued these bonds, that's the impact, the $234. However, the district already has bonds outstanding. Those are going to pay off, and your plan is to layer this in so that there's really no tax impact, that the rate stays the same. All else being equal, they would see no change in their taxes. So that's explained a little bit in that ballot proposition. And then, of course, the required language of voting for or against. As we move down, you can see in section 6, or 5 and 6, where we set up the public hearing and the notice of that public hearing. Again, that one is for the potential economic impact of the project on the private sector and the bonds themselves. That came into play when a lot of the local governmental entities were going out and financing recreation centers and maybe competing with local businesses. So it really doesn't affect when you're doing a school, you're not really competing with anyone. So you have to do it because it's statutorily required, but it's not as big here. Then you can see as we go a little further down, the fact that you're directing us to file this on your behalf with the election officers in section 7. And then in section 8 is where we get into the pro and con arguments. The board is required to prepare a pro argument. And then an opportunity arises for voters to submit a con argument. However, if no one submits one, it is not required to have one. Okay? And then this just follows kind of the statutory guidelines of when those would be due. Under the statutes, they give us like 45 days from a certain day. We put in actual days, especially where a lot of those days fall over a weekend, we adjust here. And it lays forth the process. So this is the resolution that you will be considering next week. Here's just a time where we can answer any questions, have any discussion. Pretty much the key thing that you want to focus in on from my perspective, and I don't know, Jared, if you have any other thoughts, is your ballot proposition language and making sure you're comfortable with that language, because once we file it, that's what it is. So, like I said, happy to answer any questions at this point, if you have any.
I have one. Just looking at the resolution, and there's a page in the middle that, page number 6, that allows for the recorded vote of board members. Does that mean that we need to have a roll call vote for this resolution?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have questions for Ryan? Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Jared, are you giving the follow-up?
You bet. I would invite each of the board members to read through this between now and next week, and let me know if you have any questions. As Ryan mentioned, in particular, we want to make sure that the ballot language reads well, that we're comfortable with that. So if you have any thoughts or input, questions or concerns, please let me know about that. And just for your information, you may have noted it, maybe, but if not, we have tentatively scheduled, if the resolution were approved, to have the public hearing in the October 19th meeting, and then the public meeting on November 2nd. So those are the dates in the resolution when we would hold the 2 meetings that Ryan mentioned.
Okay, thank you, Jared. Anyone else? We are to thank you all for your work and your help to put all of this language and information together. We appreciate all of your help. And I should say, and Stephen, thank you for your help with drawings. They're wonderful, like usual. We appreciate all of the effort that it takes to bring a project like this to fruition. And so next we have on our agenda board member reports. Does anyone want to report on anything?
Should I wait until the other 2 are here to ask about the monthly thank you email?
Probably.
Okay. Nope, I don't.
Okay, anyone else? All right, moving on. Board president report. It contains, on that item on the agenda, there's an attachment which is the exact language of an email that I forwarded to all of you this afternoon that just shows the critical incident language and procedures that Superintendent McKee is training our administrators, our building administrators on. And it includes most of those critical incident protocols include an email to an e-admins group. And I just wanted all of you to know that you are part of that e-admins group. So as you look at that, that will give you, I just wanted you to know that those are legit emails when they come from the e-admins. Ideally, we would have none, but I expect that we will have some because there are always incidents in the school year. But this is so that board members will be apprised of situations as they happen. not later at some later date. Just so you know that Superintendent McKee wanted you all to be privy to that knowledge as soon as possible. So that's what that's for. And then we're on to the superintendent's report.
Okay. Good evening, and thank you. First, let me just respond to the proposal that you've received this evening. You know, I'm grateful to Tim Smith and Gary Thomas and Jared Black for all the work that they put into this. Having been through a bond proposition before, I recognize that this is at least a 1 year, if not a 2-year process to plan and to work with the community to develop these proposals. And so for me to come into the process at this latter date, it's reassuring to see that there's been a lot of thought and a lot of work that's taken place to develop this proposal. I'll say that as I look at the proposal, it's not a perfect proposal, but it's the best proposal at this time. I still have concerns about overcrowding at Canyon Elementary School. I have some concerns about potential future growth as I visit with mayors and I hear about the new construction that is being approved throughout the valley. And so how's that going to impact the school district down the road? I still have some concerns about safety and these secure vestibules and making sure that all of our sites are safe for children. That being said, the thought and the work that has gone into this is the very best, I believe, at this time that we can do to meet the needs of the district, particularly if we are interested in maintaining a rate-neutral bond. And I really believe in my conversations that that is important, that we're not increasing, going to our community and to our citizens and asking them to raise their taxes with a higher rate. So again, I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you to those that have put so much work into this. The last thing I'll mention is Monday we had the opportunity to bring in all of our district administrators for some training. We talked a lot about culture and climate in that meeting. We talked about some procedures such as the e-admin as President Rhodes has described for you. You know, I walked out of that meeting just thrilled with the leadership of this district, and particularly in our buildings, the energy they have, their focus on students and student achievement, and look forward to a great year. And that's my report.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Last chance. All right. Seeing we have arrived at the end of our agenda, we will adjourn. Thank you all for being here.